and that, in fact, the differences that we see between men and women on average are more due to the way that society raises girls and boys than it has to do with anything inherently underlying biological. What's your answer to that?
So, look, does culture matter? Of course, you know, and it would be crazy to say otherwise. But is it everything? There's a lot of reason to be skeptical about that.
So these two are what you'd call right-wing feminists, or conservative feminists maybe, and they're discussing things that go against the current feminist narrative of gender being a social construct, and there's 72 genders, I think, at the last count, and that there's no difference between men and women, which is why you've got the male athletes kicking female athletes' asses out of the ballpark, because there's no difference, right? So what this woman's about to tell the audience goes against that narrative, and so she's very carefully saying, of course, is there a cultural part to the equation? Of course there is, but we'd be foolish to ignore the science. And the science is, like the last 30 years or so, it's absolutely conclusive that there are biological differences between men and women. Like there's no question about it. And she's about to touch on a couple of points, but there's the science is in there are numerous biological differences between men and women, without a doubt. There's and Jordan Peterson's actually got a bit to say on that, because he's studied it. He's been part of the studies. So what they're doing here is appeasing the left wing of the feminist movement, so that they don't cop the backlash that would inevitably follow. And they're going to tiptoe around the subject of men and women, so bear with us.
We have abundant evidence of differences that show up between boy babies and girl babies in the first days of life, before anybody's had an opportunity to program them. So little girl babies will respond more to the sound of a human in distress. Little boy babies will respond more to flashing lights and moving objects. There are noticeable differences in sensitivity to touch. In fact, in this area, sensitivity to touch, there really isn't any overlap between men and women. They're so different. Men being less sensitive, women being much more. Some of the differences are small, but some of them are not insignificant. And so they show up in infancy. We see them around the world. And speaking of around the world, if something is socially constructed, then you would expect to find cultures somewhere that do it differently, right? Wearing kilts is socially constructed. It's not innate. If it were, we'd find it, in New Zealand, well, actually, we might find it in New Zealand. Bad example.
Yep, you do find it in New Zealand, especially down in South Island, south of the South Island. Men wear kilts. I've seen it. In Thailand here, men wear sarong and women wear patong. They're basically the same item of clothing, different name for the genders. In Africa, especially the Zulu, they will wear a skirt of leopard tails. So men wearing skirts, so to speak, differs between cultures, but it's found all over the world. So it's a trivial thing she's pointing out here, that to illustrate cultural gender construct, and that's the whole. I think the crux of the matter is that yes, you can point to differences between men and women in a cultural construct context. Say that quickly. But it's trivial. Like I've got a brother-in-law here who will wear a sarong almost every day, and he's one of the most masculine men I've met in Thailand. So this idea that these what gender norms, you might say, around clothing are somehow indicative of gender being a social construct it's trivial bullshit, and that's typical of the feminist movement, in my opinion. What the women are saying is trivial now. That's all it comes across as to me. Trivial bullshit.
We'd find it in, Kenya and Peru, but we don't. Okay, fine. But other things, like, for example, surveys about what people are looking for in a potential mate. You can tell, based only on what people say they look for in a mate, whether with about 90% accuracy, whether you're looking at a male or a female. So males will say they want someone young and beautiful, and females will say they want someone with resources. This is true in Iran, it's true in Chile, it's true in the United States, it's true everywhere. And so if something is true everywhere, then it's much less likely that we're looking at something that is culturally determined.
Yeah, so that's another feminist load of crap. And you've just got to look at history to understand that. And I know the feminists don't think that women had anything to do with history before 1962 or something like that. But if you go back to the mutiny on the Bounty, Pitcairn Island, and that story there, what happened was there's Captain Cook on the Bounty. He's come across in his adventures, he's come across Tahiti back in the day. Now, Tahiti was a culture that had all its requirements regarding food, shelter, safety, etc. Met. So there were no Tahitian soldiers to protect the Tahitian society from outside forces, and so that culture had developed sexual practices that the sailors on the Bounty found intriguing, shall we say. So what they were doing was the older women would educate the younger men in sex. So they'd take young men as sexual partners, and the older men would take young women as sexual partners, and they'd teach them how to have sex properly, right? And then the young men and women would marry and procreate and have babies, and that was so. It was all about the whole Tahitian culture at the time was about pleasure and sexual pleasure and gratification, etc. And so the Bounty looms up on the horizon there, drops anchor, and the Tahitian people come out in their little dugout canoes and outriggers and whatnot, and say hello, And they did have actually quite large seafaring ships, so I don't want to belittle their culture, but they came out and met with the sailors on the Bounty, and the sailors went back to the Tahitian land and stayed on shore with the women, and they had their minds blown basically. And so you had the mutiny on the Bounty when Cook sailed away. Some of the sailors decided that they didn't want to sail with Cook. They wanted to go back to Tahiti, and they did, and they got back with the Tahitian women, and then they sailed off to Pitcairn Island and established the Pitcairn Island colony. Well, not a colony, it's a country. It's its own little country now. So, that's that's what, like she's saying that men want young, beautiful women and women want resources. Well, that's because our cultures around the world are not at peace, right? They're not. They're under threat from economic threat, from war. Like Chile. She's mentioned Chile there. Well, fucking currency in Chile and the whole economy collapses on a regular basis. Same with Argentina. So the needs for men to have young, beautiful women and for women to have resources is a cultural need. It's not a biological difference. It's cultural. So she's got her thinking, because she's a feminist, of course. She's got her thinking all wrong, and it's the feminist ideology and the lack of insight into history and science that the feminists encourage in their acolytes and in universities. This is why degrees to do with women's studies and feminist dance theory and all the rest of it are rubbish. They've got no insight. They might as well be written on toilet paper, and employers know this. That's why the women can't pay off their fucking debts.
You mentioned, beauty, that men are looking for the young and beautiful. This actually really surprised me in your book. I'm a fan of fashion, runways, and I like reading fashion magazines. So you wrote that fashion magazines of the 1950s portrayed beauty as much more attainable with effort, right? So they portrayed beauty as something that most women could attain with, these 5 tips or whatever. And it strikes me that the way that we talk about beauty today is it's very, there's a big dichotomy, right? And it seems to me to be a little bit schizophrenic. On the one hand, we have an incredibly kind of airbrushed standard of beauty that seems wildly unattainable to most women. And on the other, we talk about beauty as though it doesn't matter at all, that the only thing that matters is what's inside, your character, and that beauty is irrelevant to anything important in life. And then with the third plank of kind of ideas that seem to me to be in tension is we made, as you point out, sexuality kind of the cornerstone in many ways of our identities. And if sexuality is I think I'm trying to find the quote, the spiritual quest, right? You call it a spiritual quest. We've made sexuality to be so central to our identities. That kind of necessitates a focus on attractiveness to the other sex that might not seem as existential as maybe one of many qualities if sexuality was not as central to identity.
Yeah, we've lost a lot of the old sources of identity, and so other things are rushing in, and one of them is sexuality, and we have now the idea that there are many sexualities. I talk about that a little bit in the book, but I have to say that this is one area, the way our society has evolved in the last 25, 30 years, as I've been looking at it, where I had a lot of sympathy for the feminist view that the protesting against the sexualization of women, using women to advertise things, and yet it's only gotten worse.
So they talk about beauty standards here. Now, beauty standards is an example of the female or the feminist hive mind. As far as men are concerned, men have to take women as they are. This is the demand that feminists make. Men have to take women as they are. We can't have any say whatsoever in what they look like. That's misogyny. We can't demand how they behave. That's misogyny. So this idea that there are beauty standards that are now unattainable by most women is female. It's coming from women. It's between women. Women compete on beauty, right? The handbag is an example of that. So, women want to own very expensive luxury handbags. Now, for a man, you don't even fucking look at a woman's handbag. Who gives a rat's ass how much it costs, or who made it, or what brand it is. Men, it's almost invisible to men, a woman's handbag. But to other women, what it signifies is, I can own this very expensive item, a luxury item. I can walk down the street with it. I can be in the shopping mall with it, not working, and I can be spending money. Look at me, look at me, look at me. That's what it says to other women. I'm better than you because I've got lots of money and I don't work. The ideal of all young women today. The idea that beauty is imposed upon women by men is rubbish. It's women, and so she's saying it's very schizophrenic. Well, that's the nature of women, isn't it? They'll never get anything straight. It's always going to be beauty, unattainable beauty standard. Beauty doesn't matter. It's your character. Men have to take us as we are anyway. Blah 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 blah. MGTOW, just walk away. That's the answer. It's madness. It's madness, and the women have got themselves into this position, and I say, leave them to it.
Now there's, modesty is completely gone, and it pains me, frankly, to look at Fox News, which, has made a business out of, and the other networks do it too, but not nearly to the degree, where the camera's down there and they're wearing short skirts and, And, I think that women's dignity rests in part upon not presenting a sexualized image to the world. One of the things I cited in the book was the gymnast Ali Raceman, who posed topless for Sports Illustrated, and this was before, by the way, all the news came out about Nasser and all of that, but she posed, and it was sort of a semi-nude picture, and she said she did it to show that she didn't have body image problems. And I thought, look, and I say in the book, Angela Merkel does not take her blouse off to show she doesn't have body image problems, okay? And if she did, no one would respect her. And women have to realize that this matters, and that the way they present themselves, of course, you can always get a ton of attention by dressing in a certain way, but you lose dignity and you lose respect.
Well, you really can't fault her on what she's saying there. But of course, it's not just about attention that women are sexualising themselves. There's also the power aspect to it, and that's the power of veto that the woman has there, because a man can look as much as he likes attention. As soon as he tries to move in or touch her, the veto comes in, and anything after the veto is sexual assault. And she's got the power there to destroy a man's life. And the men are realising that this is the case, and so now just looking at a woman is a sexual assault allegation potentially. So the power of the veto there has moved in the woman's favour, you could say. So as far as dignity and respect go, men are told to respect women no matter what. We've got to respect everything about them, including that they're only going to tell the truth at all times regarding everything, and their testimony would be admissible in court eventually, I'd imagine, and not to be questioned at all in a court of law. Whatever a woman says, we've got to believe her, believe all women all the time. Amber Heard's a good example there. And Angela Merkel, I can add Margaret Thatcher to that one. Well, I don't think any man would really want to see Angela Merkel topless. Maybe her husband, I don't know, even then. Margaret Thatcher, pretty much the same. Do they have more dignity and respect? Well, you could argue the dignity there. The Angela Merkel, Margaret Thatcher. I think Margaret Thatcher displayed a little more dignity than Angela Merkel. She was more of the common touch, so to speak, coming from the communist Germany, as she did. And then you've got respect. Well, you know, I've got a lot of respect for some of the women around the place. Tulsi Gabbard, for example, she'd be one. But as far as the politicians go, no, not really. It depends what sort of job they do in their capacity as politicians, leaders. You know, and that's always a difficult road to, or difficult path to follow. So yeah, no, right. Respect is earned, in my opinion. So yeah, as far as women taking their tops off, look, you know, it's entertaining, at the very least for a man, right? Yeah, I mean, you know, tits are the first thing a little baby gets to intimate with in the world. You know, they're warm and soft and nurturing, so everyone loves tits. So more the merrier.
So you talk about the fact that men are going to look at that picture and they're not going to think about how proud she is of her body or her body image or see her as an empowered woman. They're going to think about sex. You know, I love that you have my all-time favorite quote at the top of one of your chapters in this book, which is by Horace.
Oh, yeah.
You may drive nature out with a pitchfork, and yet she will come hurrying back. How much of this nature-nurture debate, when we understand a little bit more and not be afraid to look at the scientific evidence and just to observe around us in the culture the distinctions between men and women, the differences, the deep differences between men and women. I mean, to loop back a little bit to the happiness conversation, how much potential for harmony and happiness is there in truly understanding what motivates the opposite sex, right? For men to understand a little bit more about what motivates women, and for women to understand a little bit more about what motivates men.
Well, see, this is where MGTOW can help these women, because MGTOW fully understand what motivates women, and we try to get our voices heard on the internet in what's commonly called the manosphere, which I don't believe exists. But anyway, no one wants to hear us. We're always getting shut down. Women have got to tell us what motivates them, and of course you don't get the truth out of women when it comes to understanding what motivates them, because mainly because they don't know themselves. There's very little introspection goes on inside the average woman's mind most of the time. So, and that's to do with ego. So yeah, MGTOW can definitely help, and we're helping men understand the nature of women. We're doing our best, you know. As far as what women understand about men, they don't want to understand what motivates men, right? They just want to understand how to manipulate men, and that's all it is. They don't give a rat's ass about masculinity or men in general, and that's not going to change, no matter what. That just like it's irrelevant. Men are invisible and irrelevant to women in general. You know, there's the odd CEO of a company, and that's not about the man. That's about the money, about the resources. That's as long as men are ploughing the field, women will want to be around them. But when men stop providing resources, the women aren't interested. And that's the nature of women. You've only got to see, how many times a man will lose his job, and then within 6 to 10 weeks, the divorce is on. I've seen that many times, where through no fault of his own, a man has ended up losing his job, losing his income, and literally within 3 months, the woman's packing her bags and gone. And that's what, that's how interchangeable men are to women. They're just like robots, basically. And that's the nature of women.
Right, that's so important. And one of the reasons it's so important is that if you understand that men are kind of like this, like they're not into having long 3-hour conversations about your feelings, and that there's nothing wrong with your particular husband or boyfriend that he can only last a half hour, that's just kind of why you have girlfriends and sisters and so forth. So
I find what she's just said there really telling, and really gets to the crux of female nature and the myths that surround it. So we're always told that women are empathetic, that they just naturally able to intuit and feel about everything in the world, that shouldn't be questioned, and she's just sat there and said, if women would just understand that men are different, and that they don't really want to sit down and have a 3-hour conversation about your feelings, and you shouldn't worry that your husband or partner only lasts half an hour with you. Now, if women actually were able to empathise and actually able to have some sort of insight into another person, that statement shouldn't be necessary, right? Like this, if it was natural for women to intuit and empathise about other people, then telling them that men aren't interested in a 3-hour conversation about their feelings shouldn't be necessary to say at all. So it's, to me, that is really telling that coming from a woman, she understands that women are not empathetic, that they need to be told that men are different, and that men's nature is not to sit around and just talk about feelings for fucking hours, right? Like women, this is what I mean about men being invisible and to women. It's because they just they have a completely different view on the world to men. That there's no empathy, there's no sympathy. I could go on, but I won't.
It will lead to less dissatisfaction with your particular man. And similarly, there are traits that women have that men should be aware of. And, and obviously, these are generalizations. And I want to be clear that there's a huge amount of variety within both sexes. And we've all known very mannish women and very effeminate men, and that's great. And but...
So she's about to say something that could offend the sisterhood to some degree. And so she's just got to clarify everything, that is just a generalisation, doesn't apply to you. I'm not actually speaking to you as an individual, love. This if it does, the shit doesn't fit, don't wear it, And you've got to do that with women, because they're not able to empathise. It's always about themselves. It's always, if this is why I don't talk to women, basically, because if you're going to be talking about this sort of stuff, you've got to constantly be telling the woman, A, that if it doesn't apply to her, you're not talking about her, and B, just because she says that she's not like that doesn't mean that what you're saying is invalid, right? And it's like this, you can't have a conversation with women about these topics because it's constant. Every time you open your mouth, you've got to make those points clear to her, and they will just deny what you're saying, no matter what. And it's tedious having these conversations with women. But she's about to say something that sisterhood might find offensive, so she's got to clarify that, you know, there are differences of opinion, and blah, 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 blah.
As a generalization, it is true that we are different and we don't appreciate or honor each other. And mostly I've been concerned in the last few years about the denigration of men, because I think that men are really falling behind. 60% of the undergraduates in universities right now are women. It would be higher if they didn't practice kind of silent affirmation for males. They are falling away from the workforce. They're not marrying. And it's really worrisome, not just for them, it's worrisome for women, because women want to have
our futures are bound together for, even if one is not heterosexual, but the vast majority of people are, our futures are bound together because we have sons, we have husbands, we have friends, we have, half the planet is the opposite sex for each of us, so obviously our futures are bound together.
I just think that the woman who's not speaking into a microphone and giving the sound guys spasms, I'd imagine, the author there, I think she was about to say that women need men, and she was just interrupted there and saved by her colleague who has just phrased it in terms of our futures are bound together. I could never prove that, but and there was an edit there when she was saying that there was a silent bias or discrimination. It was edited. I didn't do it. She was said that the universities are discriminating against men on their entrance criteria. So, these are right-wing feminists, obviously. Or conservative feminists, but they've still got to stick to the narrative that women are strong and independent and don't need men, and obviously. So, yeah, she's saying controversial things there, like men are falling behind. Well, MGTOW aren't. Right, and she's only saying it in the context of women want to marry up. I mean, that's another thing I think she might have been going to say was that when women look for husbands, they want to marry up, and so 60% of the college graduates are going to be women, and so good luck with that. But so I question exactly what was going on between these two at that particular point. But, men are falling behind. MGTOW are well out of it, thank God. And we'll move on to the next one.